Okay, so what are we looking at? We've got shisu novella, yes novella, that's 17, and short story is no, which is a bit harder to translate, maybe a fantasy tale.
Something like that. And to understand it all, we've pulled together, well, quite a bit. Wikipedia articles on 17, the Shimanaka incident, the assassination of Inejiro Asanuma, the editor Kazuki Kasuya, plus some blog post excerpts analyzing the Fūryū Mutan incident, and actually the full text of 2's Political Boy Dies, which is part 2 of 17.
Got it. So let's set the scene a bit more. Japan in 1960, 1961, it was intense. Oh, absolutely.
You had the massive, the Yusin-Fuka, the Anpo protests against the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, huge divisions in the country over that.
Right, the nation was really polarized.
And then, just months before these stories came out, October 1960, the leader of the Japan Socialist Party, Asanuma Inejiro, he was assassinated.
On live TV.
By a 17-year-old right-wing kid. You just can't overstate the impact of that. That violence hangs over everything we're about to discuss.
It's absolutely crucial context, yeah. That act really framed how the public received these stories. People were grappling with, real political extremism, real violence.
Okay, so let's kick off with Who's This? This came out in Bugokukai, the literary magazine, January 61.
Right. And it's generally seen as being loosely based on Yamaguchi Utoya, the teenager who killed Asanuma.
Loosely based, okay.
What's really interesting is how Ore uses that real event to explore, the inner world, the psychology of a young person pulled towards extremism. So the first part focuses on this 17-year-old boy, calls himself Or, just I. And he's
insecure.
Deeply insecure, yeah. Obsessed with death, kind of grappling with, teenage sexual frustration, all that sort of stuff.
Right. Feels like an outsider.
Exactly. And then he hears this right-wing street speaker railing against traitors, saying violence is needed to protect the weak, and it just clicks for him.
It's a bit chilling how it shows someone lost finding this seemingly powerful, clear path.
It really is. The story shows his internal struggles, feeling inadequate, terrified of what others think, and how this ideology offers him, belonging, a way to kind of shut down those fears.
Does it mention specific influences?
Yeah, he leads Taniguchi Masaharu's The Absolute Theory of the Emperor and its Influence. That definitely pushes him further.
And he gets involved in the Anpo protests.
Yes, but with the right-wing groups counter-protesting. And the novella describes these experiences as pretty disturbing for him. Really intense, unsettling emotions. Okay, so that's part 1. Then comes part 2. Zorishir, Political Boy Dies, in February 61.
Right, and this part is stark. It shows the protagonist actually assassinating the chairman of a progressive political party.
Yeah.
Then his arrest, and finally his suicide in detention.
Wow. Bleak.
Very bleak.
Now this is where things get really messy, because around the same time, this other story, Sorester, caused this huge uproar. We'll get into the details of that one in a sec.
But the timing is critical.
Exactly, because the backlash against Sire spilled over. It led to actual threats against Bungakukai, the magazine that published 17, and against O himself.
Yeah, the pressure was immense. So much so that the March issue of Bungakukai carried a kinkoku, a formal public apology from the editor.
And that second part, Political Boy Dies, it just vanished.
Pretty much. It wasn't included in OE's collected works for decades. Not until 2018, which tells you just how severe that backlash was, the kind of, self-censorship that followed.
Though, interestingly, you mentioned it's had a bit of a comeback recently, internationally.
Yeah, that's right. Translations popped up in Germany and France after 2015 or so. It seems like, contemporary worries about terrorism and extremism elsewhere have made people look at it again.
Makes sense. The themes Ura was exploring the psychology behind political violence, how extremism attracts alienated youth. Sadly, those haven't gone away.
Not at all. They still resonate very strongly today.
Okay, so that's 17. Let's switch gears now to the other piece, Fiche. This one appeared in Two Corn magazine, December 1960, so just before 17.
Right, and the controversy here was different. Very different.
What was so provocative about it?
Well, it describes a dream sequence. And in this dream, you have the beheading of the crown prince and princess.
Wow, okay.
The headless bodies of the emperor and empress, and even a scene with the empress dowager arguing, really crudely in this rough regional dialect, Koshu-ben.
And it used real names or identifiable references?
That was part of it, yeah. It was a Jitsume Shusetsu, a real name novel. It mentioned Michi, which was a nickname people associated with the crown princess. But confusingly, maybe also the deceased Empress Dowager Shogun. It was Messy.
I can only imagine the reaction, especially given the reverence for the imperial family.
Immediate and intense.
Huh.
Especially from right-wing groups, they slammed it as Fūkei sacrilegious, utterly disrespectful. And they launched these furious protests against Fukuzawa and Chukoran.
But wasn't there another side to the reaction? Didn't some people defend it?
There was, yeah. Well, a lot of literary folks thought it was just, incredibly bad taste. You had figures like Yoshimoto Takaaki, Takeda Taijun, Ishihara Shintaro, quite prominent names, who actually praised it. They saw it as satire, maybe a commentary on the imperial system itself.
So that kicked off a whole debate, freedom of speech versus...
Respect for the emperor.
Exactly. Freedom of expression versus the human rights of the imperial family. And these deeply ingrained cultural sensitivities, it hit a real nerve. What was Fukuzawa actually trying to do with the story, though? Was it just meant to shock?
Well, according to people who knew him, friends, later editors, it might have been more complex. There's a view that he wasn't primarily anti-emperor, but was actually trying to satirize the whole revolution rhetoric coming from the left-wing Ampo movement.
Ah, okay. So mocking the revolutionaries in a way?
Possibly. Some interpretations suggest the story was aimed at nullifying all realistic values.
Yeah.
Showing the absurdity and maybe the terror inherent in revolution itself.
That's a much more nuanced take than just he hated the emperor.
It is. But that nuance got completely lost in the immediate visceral reaction. Right-wing and conservative groups just saw red.
Protests at the publisher's office. Demands for apologies.
Right. And the Imperial Household Agency, the Kunaicho, they even considered suing.
Seriously, suing over a short story.
They did consider it. Apparently it was Ohiro Masayoshi, the chief cabinet secretary, who talked the cabinet out of it. Probably worried it would just escalate the whole thing, raise bigger questions about free speech.
Still, the pressure must have been immense.
Chukoran did apologize, right?
They did. An awabi, an apology, in their January 61 issue. And the editor-in-chief, Takemori Kiyoshi, he was replaced. The pressure worked, basically.
And this is where the two stories, 17 and Fūryū Mutan, start to really collide.
Exactly. They become dangerously tangled.
How so?
Well, think about the timing. Fūryū Mutan causes this huge uproar in January 61. Then in February 61, O's Political Boy dies. The sequel to 17 comes out.
Okay.
And that story, with its portrayal of a right-wing youth's sexuality and his intense emperor worship, it just poured fuel on the fire. The right-wing groups were already furious about Fūryū Mutan. O's story made them even angrier.
It wasn't just about disrespect anymore. It was about how their own ideology was being depicted.
Sort of, yeah. It was a volatile mix, and all this tension boils over into the Shimanaka incident, February 1st, 1961.
This was the attack.
Yeah. A 17-year-old right-wing youth attacks the home of Shimanaka Hoji, the president of Chukoran, the publisher of Fūryū Mutan. And his motive was clearly linked to the story.
Absolutely. He was enraged by the perceived disrespect to the imperial house in Fukuzawa's story.
What actually happened during the attack? It was brutal, wasn't it?
Horrific. The youth forced his way in, asked for Shimanaka, who wasn't home, thankfully, and then stabbed Shimanaka's wife, injuring her badly, and also stabbed their 50-year-old housekeeper, who died from her injuries.
God, that's awful. Just terrible.
It was. And the attacker's reasoning later, it's chilling. He said he blamed not just Fukuzawa, the author, but Chukoran, the publisher, for, making money off this disrespectful work.
Any symbols or anything?
He was carrying a handkerchief embroidered with Tenno Haika Banzai. Long live the emperor, he turned himself in the next day.
The fallout from that must have been huge. For Chukoran, for free speech.
Massive. There was a company funeral for the housekeeper. And Chukoran put out this company announcement, this shikoku, that tried to, walk a very fine line. It was kind of contradictory, really. On one hand, it called for Genron no Jiyu freedom of speech. But at the same time, it apologized to the imperial household and the public, and actually called Fūryū Mutan an unsuitable work for publication.
So, defending free speech while simultaneously disowning the work that caused the incident.
Pretty much. It shows the incredible pressure they were under from all sides.
And editor Takamori.
He was forced out, and the pressure from right-wing groups just continued. Fukuzawa, the author, gave this tearful public apology and basically went into hiding for years. Became known as the Wandering Writer.
And O'Leary Was he affected too?
Oe also received police protection for a while because of threats against him.
Was there talk of, like, a deal being made behind the scenes?
There were reports, yeah. Suggestions that influential conservative figures mediated some kind of understanding where Kyokuran, under all this pressure, agreed to steer its editorial policy back towards Chuzai impartiality, neutrality.
Which critics saw
As basically reinstating the Kikuno taboo, the chrysanthemum taboo, self-censorship around the imperial family. The idea that the taboo, which maybe had loosened slightly, was now firmly back in place due to violence and intimidation.
And this chilling effect spread.
It seems so. Later that year, December 61, there was the Shisu no Kagaku incident. Chukuran actually stopped publication of a special issue of that academic journal because it focused on the Tensei, the emperor system.
They just pulled it.
And apparently, this is pretty shocking, they allegedly let right-wing figures and even officials from the Public Security Intelligence Agency review the issue before destroying the copies.
Wow. Reviewing academic work before destroying it.
That's the allegation. It led to huge protests from the academics involved,
Yeah.
and they cut ties with Chukuran completely.
So if you look at the bigger picture, the decade after the Shimanaka incident, what was the impact on Japanese media?
You saw a definite downturn in critical discussion about the emperor system. A general atmosphere of, don't go there. Self-censorship became much more common when it came to the imperial household. The violence had worked, in a sense. It chilled debate.
And Fukuzawa never allowed Fūryū Mutan to be republished.
Not in his lifetime, no. It circulated in pirated forms, apparently, and eventually got a limited online release much later, 2011. But he never officially sanctioned it again. Shows how deeply it affected him.
One last thing. There were rumors about Mishima Yukio being involved.
Yeah, unfounded rumors that he had recommended Fūryū Mutan for publication. He denied it very strongly, vehemently. But just the fact the rumor circulated, and that he received threats because of it. It just shows how poisonous the atmosphere was back then.
It really is an incredibly complex story. All these threads connecting literature, politics, violence, censorship.
Absolutely. It tells you so much about the specific moment in post-war Japan, the tensions between free expression, political ideology, and deeply rooted cultural sensitivities.
And it's a stark reminder, isn't it? How fragile freedom of speech can be when it runs up against violent opposition, and how powerful these cultural taboos, like the chrysanthemum taboo, can remain.
Definitely.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe something for you, the listener, to think about. How do these events, now more than 60 years old, echo in today's debates? We still argue about artistic freedom, political speech, where the lines are drawn, what tolerance means. What can we really learn from this period about the responsibilities of artists, publishers, maybe even us, the public, when we navigate these really sensitive, challenging topics today? It gives you quite a bit to mull over.